Isaiah chapter 33, beginning in verse 1. It says, Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled, and when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. O Lord, be gracious unto us, we have waited for thee. Be thou their arm every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble. At the noise of the tumult the people fled, and at the lifting up of thyself the nations were scattered. At your spoil shall be gathered, and your spoil shall be gathered like the gathering of the caterpillar, as the running to and fro of locusts shall he run upon them. The Lord is exalted, for he dwelleth on high. He hath filled Zion with judgment and with righteousness. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of the salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. Behold, their valiant ones shall cry without. The ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly. The highways lie waste. The wayfaring man ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant. He hath despised the cities. He regardeth no man. The earth mourneth and languisheth. Lebanon is ashamed and hewn down. Sharon is like a wilderness, and Bashan and Carmel shake off their fruits. Now will I rise, saith the Lord. Now will I be exalted. Now will I lift myself up. Ye shall conceive chaff. Ye shall bring forth stubble. Your breath as fire shall devour you. And the people shall be as the burnings of lime. As thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. Hear, ye that are far off, what I have done, and ye that are near, acknowledge my might. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold the land that is very far off. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Where is the scribe? Where is the receiver? Where is he that counted the towers? Thou shalt not see a fierce people, a people of a deeper speech than thou canst perceive, of a stammering tongue that thou canst understand. Look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken. But there the glorious Lord will be unto us a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no galley with oars, neither shall gallant ship pass thereby. For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, and the Lord is our king. He will save us. Thy tacklings are loosed. They could not well strengthen their mast. They could not spread the sail. Then is the prey of a great spoil divided. The lame take the prey, and the inhabitant shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. So, going up into the beginning of this chapter, when you look at verse 1, it begins with a woe. It says, Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled. And this is just a reference to Assyria. As we know, Assyria was prophesied to destroy and conquer the northern kingdom, the 10 northern tribes. And Assyria was also prophesied to attack and try to destroy the southern kingdom, the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And so this woe is to them. To thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. And so it says, When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled, and when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. So this is just another prophecy of the destruction of Assyria that comes after God has used them to fulfill his means, to fulfill his judgments. And we know that from history, Assyria, and from the Bible, Assyria was destroyed by Babylon. Babylon conquered Assyria after Assyria was pushed back. So now, again, if anybody asks, well, why would God allow Assyria to be destroyed that way? Why would God allow that to happen? Why would that be okay? How does God get to do that? That he can just use them and then destroy them? Well, we've been going over this week after week after week. It's not that Assyria was some faithful servant of God that God just turned his back on. That's not at all what happens when God uses Assyria. Assyria, they're followers of false gods. They're followers of Satan. They are a very warlike people. God uses them for a purpose, but he also judges them for their sin. That can be true. Both of those things can be true at the same time. That these people are not followers of God, yet he can use them. And after he's through with using them, he can judge them. And he's God. He can do that. That's completely within his divine prerogative. And if you've got questions beyond that, you can ask him, not me. So it says now in verse 2, O Lord, be gracious unto us. We have waited for thee. Be thou their arm every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble. And so here is a prayer of asking for salvation, asking for mercy, asking for grace. It says, at the noise of the tumult the people fled. At the lifting up of thyself the nations were scattered. And your spoil shall be gathered like the gathering of the caterpillar. As the running to and fro of locusts shall he run upon them. And so we get this picture of just chaos, of conquering, of people running back and forth, of conquerors running back and forth, of people taking things, of this great tumult and scattering. And that's what happens when people get attacked. We have been very blessed in this country to have relative peace, to have relative safety and security. In other countries that don't have those things, that have not been blessed with those things, they understand what it's like to be attacked. They understand what it's like to be in the middle of an attack where they're not even being attacked, but other people are being attacked. They're just caught in the middle. There's just the chaos of war and battle that ensues. They understand that. That's something that it's hard for us to wrap our minds around unless you've been in the middle of it yourself. It's very difficult. However, that's the picture we're given. And it says in verse 5, the Lord is exalted, for he dwelleth on high. He hath filled Zion with judgment and with righteousness. And so here is the end of that chaos. And what happens at the end? The Lord is exalted, for he dwelleth on high. He hath filled Zion with judgment and righteousness. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. And so that's the only way that war and that chaos and that battle is ended. That's the only way that Assyria's march and siege upon Jerusalem is ended. It's the only way. Also, at the same time, I believe this is referring to the chaos and the war and the bloodshed that goes on in the latter half of the tribulation period. And who is exalted at the end of it? It's Jesus. And so, wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. Well, wisdom and knowledge was not the stability of the times back then. It will be the stability of the times in the millennial kingdom. It says, behold, their valiant ones shall cry without, the ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly. The highways lie waste, the wayfaring man ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant, he hath despised the cities, he regardeth no man. And so we see this image of destruction that results from the tumult that we read about up in verse 3. It says in verse 9, the earth mourneth and languisheth, Lebanon is ashamed and hewn down. Remember, Lebanon was known for its cedar trees, its great cedar trees, some of which were used in the construction of the temple that Solomon built. And so it was known for a very long time as a place just abundant with trees and with wood and with resources. If you go to Lebanon today, it does not look like that. It does not look like a forest. it looks plain and barren. It has not been blessed. It has been cursed. It says Sharon is like a wilderness, and Bashan and Carmel shake off their fruits. These are all places either up in the north or northeastern area of what belonged to the 10 northern tribes. These are all places that have been either that belonged to them or were just across the border of their inheritance. And Assyria took it. Assyria took those cedars and they cut a lot of them to the ground, and they destroyed that place. They conquered, and they took the fields of Sharon and Bashan and Carmel. These places were highly fertile. They were great for crops. They were great for fruits. They were great for trees. They were great for livestock. If you think about you think about the state of Kansas. There's not a whole lot in Kansas, but it is a very productive state. It has a lot of crops. Oklahoma, a lot of livestock. Imagine our country just losing Oklahoma and losing Kansas and losing Texas, and just imagine those three places, let alone all the other 47 states. Just those three states. Just imagine that those three states were wiped off the face of the map. Could you imagine? We talk about supply chain problems that people are talking about now, where there's some stuff stuck on the boat. Well, you can't imagine the supply chain problems we'd have if we lost those three places. People don't talk about Kansas very much. People don't talk about Oklahoma very much. But there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of food that's generated in those places. And if they go away, there's a lot of people going hungry. There's a lot of supermarkets that are going to have empty shelves and empty refrigerators. That's a real scenario, and that's what happened to the 10 northern tribes. That's what happened. Just taken away from them, and was spoiled by the Assyrians. So it says in verse 10, "Now will I rise, saith the Lord. Now will I be exalted. Now will I lift up myself." He says, "Ye shall conceive chaff. Ye shall bring forth stubble. Your breath as fire shall devour you." God says, I'm going to be exalted. And he says, you people, the only thing you can do is destroy yourselves. He says, "And the people shall be as the burnings of lime, as thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire." God says, there's going to be destruction. It's not the end of it. He says, "Hear ye that are far off, what have I done? And ye that are near, acknowledge my might." He says, "The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings?" And this isn't a reference specifically to hell here. When these people, it says, the sinners in Zion are afraid, fearfulness has surprised the hypocrites. And then you get these questions that Isaiah is asking here from the perspective of these sinners that were just referenced. And what does that mean? Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? I'll give you a really good idea by looking over at Hebrews chapter 12. We'll read verses 28 and 29 in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12, starting in verse 28, says, "Wherefore we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear." Verse 29, "For our God is a consuming fire." And so when they ask here, how are they going to live? How are they going to dwell with the devouring fire? That question's answered for us in the book of Revelation. What happens when Jesus, as a devouring fire, comes to the earth and rules with a rod of iron? These sinners cannot dwell with the devouring fire. These sinners are destroyed at the Battle of Armageddon. They are wiped out. They are spoken into death, out of existence on this earth, by the word of God given forth by Jesus himself. And it happens very quickly. Jesus comes and he puts an end to this problem, and then he sets up his kingdom. And we see that in verse 15. It says, "He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure." And so this is a picture of what happens at the end of the tribulation period, which is those who followed the Antichrist, those who took the mark of the beast, those who participated in the world economic and one world religious system at the end of that period, they are destroyed. The people who did not participate in that, the people who were faithful and loyal to God, the ones who survived it, it says, "He shall dwell on high, his place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks, bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure." It says he will have food, he will have shelter, he will have God. It says, "Thine eyes shall see the King in his beauty, they shall behold the land that is very far off." And I'm going to tell you what, these verses specifically are not things that have been fulfilled. Because it says, "Thine eyes shall see the King in his beauty." There wasn't a king in Jerusalem, there wasn't a king in Israel, in Judah, that matches this. There wasn't a king that comes and handles and does these things. There wasn't a king that comes and makes peace like this, that judges like this, that brings in peace like this. I really like the message, the verse on the bulletin this morning that we got. That I actually did not bring the bulletin up here with me, but you all can read it for yourselves. It's from Isaiah. We went through it a number of weeks ago. And it's Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6. "For unto us a child is born, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father." What's that last one? The Prince of Peace. He's the peace bringer. The UN is not the peace bringer. The Pope is not the peace bringer. The President is not the peace bringer. Jesus is the peace bringer. He's the Prince of Peace. Now, you might say, well, what didn't we have peace in the Middle East just a couple years ago? Didn't we have relative peace in the Middle East? No. We had a lull between wars. We had a lull between battles for a short time while there were some diplomatic negotiations going on. We didn't have peace. That's not what peace is. Peace isn't a parlay. Peace isn't a stalemate. Peace is peace. And the best that any human being on earth can offer is just that lull between wars. It's that break period. Because until Jesus comes back, there's always going to be more fighting. There's always going to be more violence. There's always going to be more bloodshed. There's always going to be more war. There's always going to be more disagreement, discontentment, infighting, outfighting, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be conflict between human beings on this earth up until Jesus puts an end to it. And like we mentioned, he's going to put it into it with a rod of iron. It's not going to be, okay, well, now we've got everybody here. Let's all just be happy and come together, and you all know what to do. Carry on. That's not what it is. Jesus gives out the law, and he says, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do. This is how you're going to live, and this is what I say, and you're going to follow my will when he comes back. That's how it's going to go. And if you want to call it a military dictatorship, you can call it that. Because that's what he'll be. He'll be in charge. But, as we know, he'll be in charge of saved people. He'll be in charge of people who have given their life over to him. All of the people before, remember what we just said, the sinners, they're not there. Now that doesn't mean that the people that are brought in never sinned once in their life, but they were cleansed. So we see this, though, in verse 17. Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold the land that is very far off. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Where is the scribe? Where is the receiver? Where is he that counted the towers? Thou shalt not see a fierce people, a people of a deeper speech than thou canst perceive, of a stammering tongue that thou canst understand. And so he says there's going to be fear. He says, thine heart shall meditate terror. And this is coming back to, I don't want to say present day, this is coming back to the local period of the time that Isaiah is writing, where the Assyrians are presenting a real threat. And the people are going to be in fear of the Assyrians. We know that. We're gonna read after chapter 34. We're going to read a few chapters, and we're going to see that. We're going to see that historical interlude that's basically a retelling of stories that we get from Kings and from Chronicles of this attack or attempted attack by the Assyrians on Jerusalem. And we're going to see that the people, they hold up in the walls. They were not, they did not have absolute 100% confidence that every single one of them was going to get out safely and alive and happy and prosperous. They were worried. Their heart meditated terror. They dealt with a people of a deeper speech than what they could perceive, a stammering tongue that they couldn't understand. Whenever you hear somebody that speaks a different language and you can't understand them, how do you perceive it? You perceive it as, a lot of people use the word gibberish. You perceive it as something you can't understand, something that it seems like their tongue is stammering, something that seems like they're not talking sense, because to you it's not sense. And so to the people in Jerusalem, whenever the Assyrians come, the people, the Assyrians, the armies, they speak their language. They don't speak Hebrew. They speak their language. And to the Hebrews, it sounds like stammering, because the languages aren't completely removed. They're both Semitic type languages. Okay? So, imagine you heard somebody from England speaking with maybe England, Scotland, or Ireland, doesn't matter which, maybe even Wales. That one's even harder to understand, because they had their own language still carries forward some. But if you hear somebody from one of those countries over there in the British Isles, even though English is the language they use to communicate with one another, if you meet somebody from the backwoods over there, I'm telling you, you're not going to understand them. You're just not. It's going to sound like stammer. They might be speaking the same language, but they're not saying the same words that we use. They're not saying them in the same way. They're not using the same phrases. It's the same language, but there's differences. That's the closest thing I can think of to try to that we could experience, that you could get with what the people of Judah are going to go through with this. That it's a language that seems right. You know, it sounds like their language, but it's not quite right. It's to them it sounds like stammering. It just sounds like somebody's stuttering or confusing words or something like that. But it's not. It's different. So it says in verse 20, look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken. And so, again, I'm going to address this very quickly. There are people who believe that anytime you see the word Zion in prophecy, that it's either specifically talking about Zion in that local time period, where it's actually Mount Zion at that time, or it's talking about the future Zion, which they call the church, because they believe in what's called supersession. They believe that the church supersedes Israel. And so they think that anytime you read Zion in the Old Testament, oh, well, that's talking about us as Christians. You know, how egotistic can you get to think that every word in Scripture is about you as an individual and the group that you belong to? There are Scriptures that are addressed directly to the church. Most of those lie in the New Testament because that's when the church was formed, after Jesus' first coming. Most of Scriptures are addressed to God's chosen people. Now, people will look in the New Testament and they'll look at what Paul wrote, and we're not going to go read it all this morning, but where Paul says that, well, the church is Israel. And it's true, we are grafted in. We're grafted into the covenant. We're grafted into the promise of eternal salvation and eternal life. We're not grafted into a land grant. Nowhere does God ever tie the church down to land. We talked about this time and time and time again. These people are connected to the land. They're connected to this rock that we call earth. He made a promise to them that there would be this patch of dirt that would be theirs, and it's going to be theirs. And again, we've gone through enough scriptures over the past few years that I hope everybody's got that pretty well ingrained. And if anybody's still got questions for me, you take it up with God. Just, that's how, as many verses as I've read and as much as we've gone through it, I cannot possibly see it any other way. I can't see it any other way than the way I see it. So, but we'll move on from that. This Zion is obviously, here the very city of Jerusalem itself is mentioned, so it should be clear that Zion is talking about Jerusalem. It says, "Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken." Well, since this local time period that Isaiah was prophesying in, since he wrote this and penned it down with his own hand, since the time that he was inspired by the Holy Spirit to write it, Jerusalem has been broken down. Its cords have been broken. Jerusalem has gone through destruction. Its stakes have been removed. It's been sacked time and time and time again. What he's prophesying about is a future event, a time when Jesus comes back and takes over Jerusalem, a time when, from that time period forward, Jerusalem itself will never be conquered by Satan's forces ever again. It says in verse 21, "But there the glorious Lord will be unto us a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no galley with oars, neither shall gallant ship pass thereby." We're going to take a few minutes to look at this. Jerusalem is a landlocked city. I hope everybody's been familiar enough over the past, I don't know how long, unless you've not been here. Ron's given out a bunch of maps to show you the topography and the geography of where Jerusalem lies on the earth and what that place looks like. There's no water, save for the Gihon Spring and save for when it gets cold out. The Kidron Valley has a brook that might flow through it every so often. That's it. You got no river that flows directly by Jerusalem. Just doesn't have one. Doesn't have the ocean. You got to go about 30 miles west to get to the coast. It's something like 30 miles. Landlocked. Here it says, "The glorious Lord will be unto us a place of broad rivers and streams." Now, how does that make any sense? Well, first, let's look over at Psalm chapter 46. And this is a psalm of prophecy. And we know that psalms can be prophetic because Psalm 22 is that's the example of the prophetic psalm. Because David writes that psalm. He describes in detail the crucifixion of Jesus. He had no idea what crucifixion was. He had no idea. That hadn't even been invented yet. We're not going to go read Psalm 22 this morning, but we've read it enough times. Ron's read it enough times. That should be clear for everybody here this morning. That's a prophetic psalm. David wrote about something that he had no idea about. He had no idea that one of his descendants, who is God himself, would be killed by human beings upon a tree. Had no idea that would happen. So, here, Psalm 46, we're going to quickly look at a few verses here. Verses 1 to 4. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Selah. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. And we'll read verse 5. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. We'll go ahead and read verse 6 as well. The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. Now, reading those verses, I was thinking about reading the whole chapter this morning, but we're getting kind of short on time. So if you want, you can read the rest there yourself. But that should be very familiar. That should sound like a lot of stuff we've been talking about over the past few months. Mountains being moved out of place. The earth melting. Waters going all over the place. It should seem very, very familiar. That's the tribulation period. Again, the psalmist here, no clue. No clue what the tribulation period was. No idea. But here they're writing about how God is going to the refuge and strength. And even though all these things happen, he's still there. But verse 4 is the one I want to look at now. It says, there is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. And the city that they're talking about, the city of God, that's Jerusalem. There is no other city of God that they would be writing about in that way. And so, there's going to be a river. Now, what is that river? And we've talked about this before. Ezekiel chapter 47. Ezekiel 47. We're going to start reading in verse 1. I'm probably going to have to skip around a little bit, but I'll let you know which verse I'm reading out of. Ezekiel chapter 47, starting in verse 1. Afterward, he brought me again unto the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house stood toward the east, and the waters came down from under the right side of the house at the south side of the altar. And so when he's talking about this house, this is Ezekiel. Ezekiel's being brought about around this, what he's calling a house. This house is the temple that exists in the millennial kingdom. You can read chapters 44, 45, and 46 if you don't believe me, and you'll see that that's what he's talking about. When you look at verse 2 here in chapter 47, it says, Then brought he me out of the way of the gate northward, and led me about the way without unto the utter gate by the way that looketh eastward. And behold, there ran out waters on the right side. So out of the face of this temple that faces eastward, which is how the temple originally faced. It originally faced in an eastward direction toward the Mount of Olives. The temple is not on that mountain right now. It's not on the Temple Mount. On the Temple Mount now is the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, two structures related to Islam. At some point, I don't know when, I don't know if it's during the tribulation, I don't know if we'll live to see it, I kind of doubt it. I kind of think it'll happen during the tribulation myself, just based on the other things I've read in scriptures. Those buildings will be removed and a temple will be built. However, this is going to be a new temple that's built for Jesus to reign in, and it's going to be built for his throne. And it says that waters are going to flow out the right side. And it says, and when the man that had the line in his hand went forth eastward, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The waters were to the ankles. And you see in verse 4, he takes him 1,000 more cubits, the water's even higher. He takes him 1,000 more cubits, it's even higher. It's in verse 5, afterwards he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass over. For the waters were risen, waters to swim in, a river that could not be passed over. Skip down to verse 10. And it shall come to pass that the fishers shall stand upon it from En-gedi even to Eneglaim. They shall be a place to spread forth nets. Their fish shall be according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. That might not mean anything to you until I explain where En-gedi and Eneglaim are. The Dead Sea. This sea that's made up of an extremely high salt content. Nothing can live in that sea. It's made up of about 60%, I think, total minerals. The sea itself is about 40% water, 60% everything else. It's not water, it's poison. That's why they call it the Dead Sea. Here, the Bible says people are going to stand there at that place where this Dead Sea is, and they're going to fish. It says they're going to bring in nets. Their fish shall be according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. This is a river of life. Now, it's not to be confused. We're going to look briefly at Revelation chapter 22, verse 1. It says, And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. This river is in New Jerusalem. This river is not the river that exists in the millennial kingdom. God makes a new river when New Jerusalem descends. So don't confuse that river of life with the river of life that exists in the eternal kingdom. Just like the millennial kingdom is not the eternal kingdom, the river that exists in the millennial kingdom is not the river that exists in the eternal kingdom. But, when we read that verse here in Isaiah, but there the glorious Lord will be unto us, a place of broad rivers and streams. Babylon can boast of the Euphrates. It's got nothing on the river that's going to come out of Jerusalem. All these great cities with all these great rivers. Egypt can boast of the Nile. Germany can boast of the Rhine River. And Rome, they can boast of multiple rivers that flow around their area. We can boast about the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. I don't know how much boasting you want to do about the Ohio River, but you can do it. Jerusalem's going to have the greatest river that will have existed on the earth up until that point. And it says, For the Lord, in verse 22, is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. I want to look at that really quickly. What are the three branches of our government? Legislative, executive, judicial. What are their purposes? Legislative makes the laws. Executive enforce the laws. Judicial interpret the law. Make sure that the laws that are made agree to the standards by which laws have to be met. God here is going to be all three of those things. He's going to give the law. He's going to execute the law, and he's going to judge according to the law. And it says, He will save us. Our form of government is nothing more than a copy of God's perfect government. It's nothing more than a cheap imitation. Now, I don't want to downplay it because it's the best government that I think that's ever existed. It was founded upon godly principles for godly purposes by mostly godly men. But it's made of men. It's not God. It's subject to failure. It's subject to being wrong. It's subject to making bad decisions. It's subject to corruption. It's subject to evil. It's subject to allowing and encouraging and accepting and approving of and of enforcing sin. That's what worldly governments are capable of, even the best ones. But God's government, His program, is the ultimate program. It's a perfect system. It says in verse 23, Thy tacklings are loosed, They could not well strengthen their mast. They could not spread the sail. Then is the prey of a great spoil divided. The lame take the prey. And the inhabitants shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. The people in the millennial kingdom, they're human beings just like us. You know, they're going to go through the tribulation, and you think, well, what kind of a person is going to be able to be faithful during that time period? They're people just like us. I just want to put that out there. They are human beings. Elijah himself was a human being. Moses himself was a human being. David himself was a human being. Noah himself was a human being. All these people that we read about in the Bible that did these great things through faith, they were human beings just like you and me. So you can take that as encouragement, and you, if you want to, you can also take it as criticism, because we've got no excuse not to be faithful. We've got not a single one. So, but here, those that make it through, it says, the inhabitant shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. They're still human beings. They still have flesh that's corruptible. But it's going to be forgiven them. Just like Jesus forgives us of our sins if we accept him. That was the whole purpose of what he came to do. We celebrate Christmas time, which is to celebrate his birth. He didn't accomplish everything at his birth. He accomplished everything with his death and resurrection. We celebrate his birth because it is important. It's the coming of God to the earth as human being. It's a coming of God to the earth in a mortal form. But what he accomplished wasn't accomplished on that day. It was accomplished 33 and a half years later. And so, and you can look at it the same way. What he's accomplishing through us now as the church, even though we are a special called out group unlike any other group that's existed before or will exist after, what he's going to accomplish, the greatest thing he's going to accomplish, isn't going to be through us. It's going to be something he does himself. So, that is chapter 33 of the book of Isaiah. Any quick questions or comments this morning?